Well, welcome to another episode of the Residential Developer Podcast. I'm the host, Nathan Battishall, and what I'm going to do on this podcast today, I'm going to break down the low to mid-rise reforms, the stage 2 reforms around only the dual occupancy or the duplex. So the exciting thing is, as you would have seen in our previous 2 episodes, we on the 28th of February 2025, New South Wales State Government brought in the new legislation around the low to mid-rise housing reforms, and we see now it's actually come into effect. It's in the state policy. It's now implemented into that policy, and as a result, now we can do dual occupancies within well-located areas across certain parts of New South Wales under that code. So just to recap again, if you didn't, 2 episodes ago, I broke down this new reform, this new policy. So I encourage you, if you haven't seen that, after this episode, go back and watch that episode because I do a real blanket overview of this policy. But just for this episode's sake, I'm just going to break it down. So essentially, this reform is for areas that are considered well-located areas. So it's come into effect in Sydney. It's come into effect in Illawarra, Shoalhaven, Hunter, and Central Coast. So these areas now, there's particular pockets and areas that the state government has deemed where they would like to see an increase of housing, areas that are considered well located, close to train stations or close to local centres. We now see that we're able to do developments, dual occupancies, multi-dwelling units within this legislation, which is exciting. So for yourself as a listener, someone wanting to do investments and developments, if you're listening today, you may want to go down the pathway of dual occupancy and duplex. So I'm going to break down this policy. I'm going to give you some tips, and I'm going to give you some things to look for as you begin the process of site acquisition, or maybe you've already got a site that fits within this area. So we've seen that the state government has released some mapping, and again, we'll make sure this mapping is in this in the show notes for this episode. So you can click on that link, you can check the site that you're looking at or the site you already own to see if it fits within a well-located area. I know there's a lot of people that have already realised that some of the suburbs that they thought were that were close to a train station or close to a local centre are not in that mapping. As to how the state government came up with that, we're not fully sure, but the reality is they've chosen these particular areas because they've deemed that they want to see growth and housing growth and population growth within these particular suburbs and these particular areas. So we're going to break down duplex and dual occupancy. So under this new code, this state legislation sits above council's current legislation. So if council currently had lot sizes, lot widths, this new policy actually sits above some of these elements. So we see there I'm just going to break it down. So we see for dual occupancies or duplexes now, if it's in a well-located area, the minimum lot size is 450 square metres, which is a game changer for a lot of councils. Now, we see this has come into effect in R1, R2 and R3 zoning. So the big one is R2 zoning. In a lot of councils, quite a few councils, we haven't been able to see dual occupancies in R2 zoning, which has now come into effect, which is exciting. So if it's within that area, 450 square metres is the minimum lot size. So a lot of councils are 500, 550, 600 square metres. So all of a sudden we can do dual occupancies on smaller lot sizes. And now another massive game changer is the frontage width. The frontage width now permissible under this new low and mid-rise reform is for dual occupancies is 12 metres, which is huge. There's a lot of blocks, especially in and around CBDs, in and around train stations, where it doesn't meet the 15 metres that a lot of councils tend to require for dual occupancy. So all of a sudden now it's opened up a whole bunch of new sites. And you would have seen from last week's episode, we saw there, talking with Will from PropCode, that this has opened up about 120,000 new development sites across these well-located areas in New South Wales, which is very exciting. We see there that the floor space ratio 0.65 to 1, so 65% of the site can be used for floor space ratio, which is great considering a lot of R2 sites tend to be 50%, 45%, some even 40%. So excellent FSR uplift. We see the height limit, 9.5 metres, which is terrific. A lot of councils are 8.5 or 9 across a lot of these well-located areas currently in council's LEP. So we see that's a really exciting opportunity. In the parking space, one parking space, only one parking space required. So especially in places like the Northern Beaches where you generally require 2, a lot of councils will require 2. You're only required to have 1 car parking space. Minimum lot size for a Torrens title, 225 square metres per lot, resulting lot with a width of 6 metres. So some excellent opportunities to do dual occupancy developments. Now, all of those reforms that I've just mentioned, all of those non-discretionary standards that I've mentioned, these particular standards, essentially now they're introduced into the SEP. It's a state policy and it sits as a hierarchy above council's local policies. So council have their local environment plan, the LEP, and then they have their development control plan, their DCP. So councils will have elements of their LEP, which generally have things like height limit, minimum lot size for a dual occupancy, FSR sits within that. There's a bunch of things. Subdivision size often sits within the LEP. And then there's elements of the DCP as well. So these particular standards now sit as a hierarchy above those elements. So just because council might have a minimum lot size of 600 square metres for a dual occupancy, if you are within that well-located area and it doesn't have any of the constraints that basically deem it not to be permissible, things like bushfire, flood affected, there's a range of different things. You can actually submit this application meeting that criteria, even if it counteracts council's local policy, because this new policy overrides it. But the big thing I wanted to focus on over the next 15, 20 minutes in this episode, I want to talk about some of the things that you need to look for, because just because there's 120,000 plus sites now opened up or available that will be possible to do these low to mid-rise projects on doesn't necessarily mean that it is going to be possible, because there are still constraints, site-related constraints that you need to look at. So I think it takes you need to have wisdom and you need to be well informed, and that's, I guess, the aim of this episode, is to give you a bit of a toolbox or a little bit of an arsenal to when you do go out. If this is your strategy to go and identify a site within a well-located area under this new policy, to be able to do a dual occupancy or a duplex, which you would not have possibly been able to do in the past, especially on those narrower blocks, those smaller blocks in particular council areas where that was not possible in the past. The beauty is, for an early adopter, you are able to often get a site for a better price because the market sometimes hasn't caught up on what's possible and not possible under this code. So you may be able to get a site more for market value, not for development value. And that's obviously one of my big things I talk about on this podcast is a lot of people, when they see a development site, especially a vendor or an agent, well, often an agent who's trying to get a listing, they might know that site's worth $1.2 million. But the moment they know you can do a duplex on it or 3 townhouses or something else on it, they'll to try and get the listing, they'll tell the vendor, I can get you 1.3 or I can get you 1.25, which is all well and good. Good on you, get the listing. But in our space, in the space of yourself as a listener who wants to do developments and projects and you're wanting to generate wealth through property, the problem is when an agent's getting purely upping the price of a site to get a listing, you're taking healthy margin or healthy profit out of a potential development or an investment, purely just trying to get that listing. So obviously this is a prime time for the early adopter. It's like any type of opportunity that comes available, what the early adopters tend to be the ones that do well. So I think as an investor, if you can really get smart and get good at identifying these sites, get good at negotiating these sites, get good at get the right people around you, whether it be a buyer's agent, a real estate agent, or whether it be a consultant or getting off-market properties yourself. I just think people who are early adopters, know their numbers, can execute the numbers, will do really well. But I just want to give you a bit of a toolkit, some things to look out for when you're doing your due diligence in this exciting phase, and it's one of the biggest for me, planning reforms. It's one of the most exciting planning reforms that's come into effect in New South Wales, definitely in my lifetime and in my career lifetime. I think it's an exciting thing for New South Wales. Yes, it will come with its challenges, but the exciting thing is it's come into effect, and I'm already seeing sites getting snapped up very quickly in some of these well-located areas. So, look, we see there we've now got access to smaller lot sizes, smaller frontage widths, potentially more FSR in certain areas, really good height limits. Some of the parking restrictions now are a little bit lighter, but there's still some things that you need to really take into account when you are getting a site to do a dual occupancy on under this new reform. At the moment, you still need to submit a DA. Under this code, you still need to do a DA. Okay, so when you do that DA, there's still elements of council's development control plan that you will need to abide by. It's all well and good to have a 12-metre frontage, but, you need to take into effect what's on that site. So does the site drain from a stormwater point of view? You still need to check that, because there'll be a lot of sites in certain councils and certain areas where there's no option but to do an easement on a backward sloping block, where you'll need to negotiate an easement, just like traditional development. So you still need to take that into effect. So of a lot of those sites that are available, there's still constraints like things like backward sloping blocks that may not be able to be developed unless you can sort out a stormwater solution, if no other solutions are permissible or available within that council. You've still got the element when it comes to trees, native trees on the site, trees on the street. Can you get suitable driveway access? A lot of these, especially in inner city or areas that are sort of in dense or well-populated areas, often you'll find a lot of these established areas have quite established native trees. And on a 12-metre wide block, for example, that's tricky. Like, it's tricky in terms of whether you can get the driveway crossovers in. Then you've got to deal with councils in terms of, does council want are they happy with two crossovers, two separate driveway crossovers? Some councils might be on board with that. Some may want a single crossover. And the problem is, if there's a street tree in the middle of the property or a native tree in the middle of the site, that can then cause headaches and issues there too. So there's still a lot of planning controls and things that you'd need to look at for any traditional development or investment based project that you need to factor in. And then you've got trees on the site. Is there large native trees on the site? Is there any constraints that are going to hinder that type of development? So, and look, with a smaller lot size comes a whole range of different controls. For example, when you prepare this application and this DA to council, it's all well and good to say that you can put a duplex on a 450 square metre block on a 12-metre wide block, and you want to max it out to, say, 9.5 or 9.4 metre height, but you still need to comply with elements of that council's DCP. You need to show that you won't directly overshadow, especially people's private open spaces and living areas. You're still open to neighbour notification if you are causing any privacy concerns, any overshadowing concerns. You still have your setback constraints. So you've got your front setbacks, your side setbacks, you've got your rear setbacks. For a lot of councils, you need to meet your building envelope requirements. So your first floor may need to come in. Just because the FSR constraint is now 65%, there'll be some councils where you may not be able to use that full 65%. So don't just base your numbers on being able to do a particular square meterage of property. You need to take into effect landscaping is a big one. Some councils have quite extensive landscaping, some not so much, but there are some that will require some councils require upwards of 40% landscaping, some 35%. Some require a certain percentage of deep soil planting. So you need to still factor in. There's nothing in this SEP that a control in terms of a percentage of landscaping like we see in the CDC for duplex and dual occupancy. We see in the SEP there's a particular percentage, there's a particular calculation. You still need to meet council's DCP requirement for landscaping. So that's a big one. You need to factor those elements in, get a good understanding of that council that you are looking to tackle a project in to determine, is that possible? So this is where site orientation will really come into play, because you still need to comply in terms of your solar access as well. Now, most councils these days, you need to achieve anywhere from 2 to 3, some even 4, but generally 3 is the main control most councils tend to have. You've got to have 3 hours of continuous sun in winter. So you still need to meet that compliance. So does your living area receive 3 hours of continuous sun in winter? Does your private open space directly access from the living, does it receive that solar access? So straight away, you might have a block that, for example, you may want your living areas at the back, like the typical dual lock or duplex, where you want your living to flow into the backyard. But if the backyard directly faces south, you're potentially going to come up with some troubles in terms of meeting your solar access. All of a sudden, you're dealing with a much narrower block, a 12-metre block, instead of, say, a traditional 15, 16, 17-metre block. So, it's trickier to really make it work to modify the back of the property to try and get and maintain a little bit more sun. So there's going to be a lot of those controls and constraints that are very much dictated as well by orientation. How are you going to orientate the property? Does it work? Is it suitable? Is it going to meet that solar access requirement? Then you got things like private open space. Every council has their own percentage of private open space or dimensions of private open space, and then you've got your principal private open space. Some councils don't have a dimension. A lot of councils do. Some councils even have a dimension of that principal private open space from a boundary. So there's still a lot of controls and a lot of constraints that you need to really factor in. So just because you've got a 9.5 metre height limit doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to utilise all of that. You still need to fit within the streetscape. You've got to show within your statement of environmental effects in how you're not having an adverse impact on the streetscape, on the amenity of the area. So there's a whole lot of controls you still need to factor in, which is going to require good planning, good design, good skilled, qualified, creative people that can navigate these things and tackle these elements. And that's why, for me, it's very much important when you're listening to this episode to really get a lot of these tips and these thoughts that I'm sharing right down so that you can become an expert at finding the right suitable site and really running it through the checklist or the eyes of those constraints. So ideally, you want to be looking for a site that really ideally faces north or east at the back, especially if you're wanting your living area to flow into the backyard like most traditional duplex or dual locks will do. And another big thing for your detached dual locks you need to factor in is access. Especially on large, longer blocks, that's a big one that people will need to really look at and address of how that is actually possible. A detached dual occupancy where you have one at the front, one dwelling at the back, and you might have a driveway that goes down the side of the property. You still need to. A lot of councils may have a particular size landscape strip. Then you've got your driveway width. Some councils might even want a landscape strip alongside the house, and all of a sudden, if it's only a 12-metre wide block, it leaves then you've got your side setback. It leaves very little distance then for the actual width of that dwelling. And then do you have enough length to make that work? Can you get suitable solar access? But then you need to look at things like manoeuvring, traffic and vehicular manoeuvring. Can you manoeuvre? Can you prove and show council that you can manoeuvre those vehicles in a 3-point turn or can you meet the Australian standard? A lot of councils have their own standard on top of the Australian standard. Can you show council and demonstrate to council that you can manoeuvre those vehicles in an appropriate way to be able to enter and exit that site in a forward motion, which most councils will tend to want. So there's a lot of controls that you really need to get on top of, that you need to get your head around, so that you're well equipped to be able to carry out this process in a terrific manner. But the good thing is that this is a great opportunity in this space. At the moment, it is DA. So when you are negotiating on sites, I always tell people, if you're looking to buy a site, try and get delayed settlement. The challenge is going to be some councils are very hamstrung in terms of their ability to produce fairly efficient approvals. So you need to really know the council too. And there was a previous episode I did where I spoke about becoming excellent or working with people that are terrific when it comes to DA submissions and applications, and you need to always have contingency in that space. But also know this, because of this now increase, this potential 120,000 new sites coming available, we may see a bit of a bottleneck. We may see a lot of councils are already struggling with their capacity. With an increased capacity, you need to be aware it actually could cause a bit of a bottleneck in the system. So don't run off overinflated approval times. Don't, like, if that council's currently taking 9 months to approve a duplex, well, for me, allow 12 months. If that current council's taking 12 months, put some contingency in there. Put 15, or if you can, 18. Try and get a delayed settlement on the site. It's not always easy, but if the holding costs are going to make or break the feasibility, or if they're going to have an adverse impact on the FISO, walk away from the site if you can't get the terms that you need to make the numbers work. Because for me, it's about alleviating stress from the process. It's about making sure that you're able to navigate this in a healthy way. And if a site just really is contentious in terms of some of those constraints I've spoken about, whether it be trees, native trees, whether it be stormwater constraints or setbacks constraints or solar access, or if there's constraints around landscaping that hinder the project or development, the best thing to do is to walk away and to avoid purchasing a headache. But the reality is, out of 120,000 of these sites that have become available, that can be developed, there's going to be a lot of really terrific sites, and it's just a case of wading through the average ones and the okay ones to find the great ones. And that's, for me, what good investors, what good developers, what good mum and dad investors wanting to do projects to generate wealth do. They become terrific at playing the patient game, finding the right site, and executing in a terrific project. So, look, there's exciting opportunities. I'll be putting some links in the show notes so that you can really tap in to these constraints. I'll put a link to a blog article with a checklist and a whole bunch of controls to be able to use as your own personal checklist when you are looking to develop your site. Or when you're looking to acquire a site, just so that you have all the tools to be able to do a duplex and a dual occupancy under this new low-rise reform in a way that generates you wealth. So, look, I hope you've enjoyed this short episode on doing duplexes and dual occupancies under the new low to mid-rise reforms, the stage 2. If you've enjoyed this, I want to encourage you to share, like, subscribe, share it with friends, family, anyone you know that is passionate about doing projects and developments and generating wealth through property. I'll see you next week.